Hello and welcome to Iron Dinos. I'm Shaun and we're continuing our playthrough of Metroid Zero Mission while talking about the various Metroid games that I have played. I'll just give you this up front. We do see the final boss in this episode, but what we're basically doing is we're just walking around, seeing what we can find in the way of power-ups and stuff like that. Because I did find the final boss earlier than expected in this playthrough. This was all completely fresh, so I thought, well, I know I'm going to have more games. So I knew roughly how many parts this needed to be. I knew I was going to have more games to talk about, so I thought, why not go about, find some things. So essentially what you're seeing after you see the boss coming up, everything you're going to see is basically just there for background and stuff. When we finally get to the last part, we're going to be talking about Zero Mission itself. Then we'll show off the final boss, we'll kill it and everything like that. So yeah, if what you're looking for is, let's face it, if you're using this for a walkthrough, I'm sure there are lots better ones, but if you just want to hear me talking about how much I love Metroid, then yeah, we're gonna carry on as usual. So next up is Metroid Prime Hunters for the DS, or as I like to think of it, Metroid Prime Hunters for the 3DS, because dear God, that hurt my hands so much using the old DS for the game, whereas on the 3DS, with the rounded corners, it's a delight. But anyway, we normally start with is the story and so forth. So this one takes place between Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2. It starts with an awesome track cinematic showing a bunch of badass bounty hunters, and that's kind of the gimmick this time. It's you and a bunch of bounty hunters all competing for one great prize, whereas before it's largely been Samus on her own in an area trying to murder her way to victory. So it starts with this awesome attract screen. It shows you all of the bounty hunters, who are of course Samus, the most awesome of all. There's one called Noxus, a Vozon bounty hunter. A Vozon bounty hunter who is basically trying to collect it to keep it out of the hands of evil, so he can use it in his fight for good. This is a heroic guy. Spire, the one remaining Diamond, who wants the ultimate power so he can discover more information what happened to the rest of his race. Candon and Enuema Experiment. I'm reading this slightly from a guide. An experiment go horribly wrong that wants to gain more and more power. Silux, who is a deadly and powerful bounty hunter who hates the Galactic Federation, is a rival for Samus. I believe this is the guy who's at the end of that little end tease at the end of Metroid Prime 3, Corruption, and has been rumoured for a long time to be a antagonist in 4, but we'll see as and when that finally comes out. Trace is a member of the Kriken race, currently on a rite of passage and searching the galaxy for new planets for his people to invade and conquer. Very feared, very dangerous, from a warlike race. And last but not least, but possibly least, we have Weevil, a space pirate who's nearly killed by Samus on planet Zebes, however we decided to pronounce that. And his shattered body is now supported by a cybernetic life suit. Wants revenge on Samus. Pretty awesome. So yeah, that's a bit of background on the characters that you meet along the way. Honestly, they're not. The idea of them is more integral to plot than they themselves are. They kind of function as bosses, and then at the end, which I'm sure we will go through, but I'm sure you'll figure out long in advance. They show up to a degree at the very end. So the plot, taking place between Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime 2. It takes place in the Limbic cluster. This has got a lot of words. Like, the lore of this is a lot of words that I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce. This is just made up sci-fi nonsense, which I love. Do not get me wrong, I absolutely love it, but I digress. The game takes place in the Olympic cluster. Like the Chozo, the Olympics were a prominent race that suddenly vanished, leaving relics and objects from their society, mainly in the form of slightly hidden power-ups, mega weapons, and keys. So many keys. Suddenly, a message is sent out, telepathically and also digitally, I believe. The secret to ultimate power resides in the Olympic cluster. Obviously, the bounty hunters all descend into the cluster in search of this ultimate power, with the Federation sending Samus to investigate and keep the power out of the wrong hands. Because to be fair, if there's one thing we've seen with Samus and her ever-growing arsenal of weapons, is she doesn't tend to turn on the forces of good with it. She does tend to mostly use it to kill Metroids and or Metroid adjacent threats. So, you know, that's a safe bet. Samus arrives at the Celestial Archives, a space station that holds the Olympics histories that, naturally, has degraded to just drip feed a small amount of information while leaving most of it swathed in mystery. Like the Chozo. She fights a hunter called Camden to gain the first of 3 artifacts, which are keys. These are required to open an inner chamber which contains a boss. After defeating it, she receives her first octolith, another kind of key, but this is one of the keys to this ultimate power. There's going to be a very key-heavy game. God, so many keys. A timer starts and Samus has to race back to her ship in classic Metroid fashion, which is kind of weird, as you can kind of immediately go back through that area as though nothing has happened, but fine, whatever. You can now explore more worlds and find more keys. Alinos, the homeworld of the Olympics, the Vespa Defense Outpost, a remote defense and weaponry station, and Arcterra, a frozen world. Each holds 2 octoliths. Each world also has an affinity weapon, which Samus must use to open more areas, to find more artifacts, to open more octoliths. That opens the goddamn thing at the end, so we can finally stop collecting keys. We just need to open 1 chamber. 1 key is enough! But no, it's fine. So these affinity weapons, just to take a side, kind of, each one is keyed to each of the bounty hunters that have got in search, which is tremendously convenient. And when you play the multiplayer, if you link up a couple of DSs, you play the multiplayer, something I will sadly never do. I don't know anyone else who owns this game, and I'm not big multiplayer. But you can play as, you can choose which of these bounty hunters you also play as in death matches. So you can run around and you can have tons of fun just doing that and fighting each other. And you can then use these affinity weapons and so you use those to devastating effects. But yeah, back to the game. Samus collects all the octoliths and returns to Alinos to activate the Olympic chamber, the Olympic cannon, which allows access to the oubliette. This really could have done with a more diverse way of progression. Like, obviously, it's a Metroidvania, so the thing is always do X to obtain more access, to obtain access to Y, to open up the game more and more. But it's just, you can call them artifacts, you can call them octoliths, whatever. Essentially, all you're doing is gathering keys, and it kind of, you know, it kind of feels a little silly. But anyway, surprise! The oubliette, in fact, holds a giant monster called Gorilla. I'm just pausing for, like, the immense amount of shock you've all just gone through on this revelation, because, I mean, like, absolutely, definitely didn't see that coming, right? Yeah. obviously. So Samus arrives as the other bounty hunters are already fighting Guria, which begs the question, what advantage exactly does Samus, the successful hunter, get, having wasted her time and busting her ass trying to obtain more keys than a Busendorf Imperial Concert Grand Piano? Poor old Samus has done all of this work. She opens the chamber, but everyone else can already be waiting at the chamber and jump in. Like, it absolutely does not benefit her whatsoever. If this were a regular treasure, as opposed to the admittedly incredibly obvious bait and switch of a surprise giant monster, Borderlands says hello, Quake says hello, all of these things, but whatever. Samus would have done all this work and one of these fucking losers could have just yoinked her prize. It's ridiculous. Anyway, Guria of course beats the ever-loving heck out of the assembled losers, each of whom is using their signature weapon, and it absorbs their special abilities. As usual, it is up to Samus to kill the monster and save the universe. She does so, but on defeating the Guria, its power overcharges and consumes the entire installation, killing everyone, Samus included. It's fucking bleak. No, there's a trick, of course. During Samus's battle with Guria, she must shoot the coloured floating panels with the correct weapons correspond to the bounty hunters, each of which are differently coloured, which on defeating Guria opens a second battle with Samus obtaining the Omega Cannon. She kills the Guria, the Oubliette explodes, Samus gets a thank you from the Olympics, everyone goes home, and this is all a gigantic waste of time for everyone involved. For a Metroid story, the idea of using the bounty hunters as a hook, you're each going for a prize, is something somewhat different from what we've seen before, but I don't feel they particularly utilise the hunters that well. They do show up as bosses throughout the game who you have to defeat to progress, but like, I felt they did a better job in Prime 3 Corruption, using the other bounty hunter heroes. They seem to have more character and more impact, I guess you could say, on the story as a whole. And maybe that's a bit unfair, but here they do just come across as bosses because there are no cutscenes featuring them that actually flesh out their characters or why. You've got the bit from the manual and you've got that like attract mode thing, but that's largely all you get from them. And then you've got the scanning mechanic, as in all the Prime games, so you pull a little bit of information about them through that. So yeah, it doesn't feel like they're anything more than it doesn't really feel like they're anything more than just bosses in Samus's way, and that's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it for a game that's basing itself around the idea of having loads more bounty hunters, it could have been done in a more interesting way. And I know that part of that is also, you then get to play as those additional hunters in the multiplayer, which is all well and good, but that doesn't do a lot to flesh them out as players in the universe, in the Metroid universe. They just come across as bosses, but I still really like the idea. And as I said, it's long been believed, and this may just be a fan thing, but it wasn't the end of Metroid. Wasn't the end of Prime 3. It's long been thought that Psylocke is going to make his big return and actually be a big thing in future. So that's kind of a cool idea. I'm up for that, but yeah, we just need to see as and when Prime 4 finally releases, because as it is, we've been waiting a little while. I know it was announced God knows how many years ago, and Nintendo did basically do a "this is not good enough" you need to, we're going to start again. Gave it back to retro. So I'd rather have something of quality than something not. Absolutely. But still, I would at some point like to play it before my death. You know, as I'm sure most of you would agree. So as a game, as a 3D Metroid experience on the 3DS, I thought it was okay. I didn't dislike it, but as I said before, I did have a problem playing it on the regular DS because those corners are sharp. It's quite heavy. I felt a lot heavier than the 3DS. Maybe its weight is more poorly balanced. I don't know, but yeah, I couldn't play it for long stints of time on there. Since getting my 3DS, which I specifically bought for Samus Returns, which we'll talk about in a minute. Yeah, it's such a better game. It's never gonna look the best because of the limitations of the hardware, but it plays fine. It plays like a massively dialed down version of a Metroid Prime game, which is I guess what they were going for. So well done on that. I kind of liked the way they did the morph ball. It felt very its momentum when you're rolling around feels really satisfying. Yeah, and it being on a DS, because it sounds like arse. There's not really much you can do about that. It doesn't sound great, but you know, it's fine for what it was. And toggling everything down to a couple of buttons and then putting the visors and stuff are on the bottom touch screen, which really was a good idea because it feels better than constantly having to pull up a menu, and you've got the restrictions of the numbers of buttons they have. So I quite liked that way of switching between control methods. I thought they did a decent job there. By the time we finally got to play the game, by the time I got to play the game properly on my 3DS, that was a good time. It looks, yeah, I think it looks okay for the hardware it's on. Obviously, a lot of it it looks very blocky, very squared, because of the lack of power of the hardware, but you know, they were doing their best. I think overall it is a game worth playing, and I think overall it is actually a pretty decent time. But is it one of my favourites? Not really. It's just a bit. It suffers a little from what it lacks, and yeah, it suffers a bit for what it lacks, but that's not to say that it isn't a worthwhile time. And also it is impressive that they managed to do it as well as they did on just the regular DS. Like, because it is a full 3D game. Well, it looks like a full 3D game, I should say. You know, it looks as you'd expect it to on that system. But yeah, so Metroid Prime Hunters is good. I'm glad I played it. It's definitely on the lower end of what I enjoyed. It's probably getting tongue-tied. I apologise. It's definitely on the lower end of the Metroid spectrum, but when a series is of such immense high quality as the Metroid series, you don't tend to worry so much. So the next one we would talk about would be Metroid Prime Pinball, but I've not been able to get a copy of that, and it's a pinball game, so I don't know if I'd spend a vast amount of money on it, even if I did. And I'm not overly sure that even released in the UK, because whenever I've tried to eBay it in the past, it's always been from America. So that may not even have been an option to begin with. But yeah, so now we go on to the reason I bought my 3DS eventually got one, and that is for Samus Returns, which was the remake of Metroid 2 for the 3DS by is it Mercury Steam? I think it's Mercury Steam. The guys who went off to make Dread, which will be the subject of our next video. And I've not completed this yet. I have played many hours, because it'll come up in our other videos. I'm the kind of person who likes to complete one game before moving on to the next. So it took me a long time to beat Hunters, because I wasn't the most because you know, it's not the greatest thing I've ever played, so it wasn't the highest of priorities. But then you've got but then by the time I got the 3DS, I wanted to finish Hunters before moving on to the next game. So that's why I've not played all of thing. Plus, it took me forever to get a copy of Samus Returns. Oh, I would have done this years and years ago. I only got my 3DS in like, well, I got it in August, a couple of months ago. But yeah, it's you can see, like, so Dread is a perfected version of what Samus Returns is, but Samus Returns lays the groundwork phenomenally. It's so good. It feels fantastic. It looks great. Like, I wouldn't say it looks as good as Dread, but honestly, I don't think it's far off. Because of the smaller screen, you can hide. Unlike with Hunters, you can't hide the imperfections as well, because it's big, chunky. Everything's big and chunky. Whereas going back to the 2D and having a smaller main sprite and smaller enemies and stuff really works in the favour of Samus Returns. So everything looks so much better because it's all more condensed. So you've got more space to make the backgrounds, because the backgrounds aren't doing anything really. There may be a little something over here and there, but for the most part the backgrounds aren't actually doing anything. So you can make them look beautiful, and it makes everything in front of it pop. And while that's happening, as long as that's happening, you can you've got more control over how your game is looking as a whole, which is just absolutely fantastic. Like I say, it plays really well. I'm not going to go through the plot, because the plot's largely the same as Metroid 2, and if there are any surprises, I'm not going to look them up, because I want to find them for myself at the end. But yeah, so mostly I can talk about how it looks and how it plays and everything like that, and that is just absolutely wonderful. The knockback thing from Dread is there, so you can parry an enemy when they attack, and you can so you can use that, and you can gain a bit of health from that and all stuff. All the stuff you would largely expect is here, and it's fantastic. So that is well worth your time. I don't know why, but Nintendo just kind of suddenly, like, I was trying to get hold of it for years, and Nintendo just suddenly like released a new batch of them or something. So I think it was like a year ago. I apologise. I don't know why the hell I didn't figure out I can fucking bomb that glass tube. I will figure it out eventually. Anyway, yeah, I don't know why, but Nintendo just kind of out of the blue decided to release a load of more copies. So while I had been for years contemplating spending, you know, 60, 70 quid on a copy of that second hand, yeah, I managed to get myself a copy quite cheap from, because they released some more ones, and that's just absolutely awesome. Very, very happy with that. So I suppose that only leaves us with Metroid Federation Force to talk about. Again, I haven't played this one yet. It's not high on my list. It's like Other M. It's one of the black sheeps of the family, and it's got such poor, just general consensus around it. I'm not in a hurry to play it. Like, as much as I love the Metroid series, I do play other things, you know. So it's like getting around to it, finding the will or the interest to sit and play through a game that is by and large not seen as good, or not seen as of the quality of the ones I really like. It's a bit hard for me to really want to put in the effort to play it, unless it's you know, unless it's got Batman in it, and then I'm kind of compelled by my overwhelming love for Batman. But you know, I when it comes to something like even something like Metroid, I'm a bit on the side that I don't really want to taint the quality I perceive the series at if I'm of the belief, or the general consensus is, that one of the games I'm going to play is not in any way, shape or form up to the quality of the others. How many of these guys are up there? But yeah, so Federation Force, you don't play as Samus. It was designed to be a co-op game. It's back to being a first-person shooter, so it does look a lot better than Prime Hunters, but it still doesn't look. It still doesn't look great, and it looks slow and undynamic of what I've seen. Bear in mind, I've not watched a lot of it. Because again, I don't want to spoil it. I will, at some point, I will have the time to play it. But yeah, it looks. It just doesn't look particularly interesting, and that's not particularly ideal. But it is. Again, I do own it. It's on my list of things to do, and I'm sure it's absolutely got its fans. It's probably actually it's always a bit of a is it my fault or is it the game's fault situation, where it's something like this is a multiplayer. Well, I don't particularly want to play multiplayer games. It's not really my cup of tea, which is fine. But more importantly, what I really don't want to do is have to find someone to play a multiplayer game on the bloody DS with. But that's how it's meant to be played. So that's obviously its greatest strength, and I'm unlikely to experience that. So maybe I'm being a little unfair about it. But like I said, my time is finite, and I would rather replay a Metroid game I know I'm gonna love, with the amount of time that's gonna take, than play something I'm probably not gonna like anywhere near as much. That's my thinking on the situation. But again, time will change, I will change, and you know, I have purchased it, so at some point I got it for like £6, nothing. But at some point I will give it a play, and I'm hoping it surprises me. But do come back next time when we're going to be talking in depth about Metroid Dread. A fucking incredible game. I apologise that this one's been a little bit rambly, but that's just the mood I've been in today, so sorry. I will see you next time. Bye bye.